Good day, beautiful people. It is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. And wow, some big news out of the industry just announced over the weekend. NBAA is canceling base in Orlando this year, which I know a lot of people were probably expecting, but this probably comes as a big blow to companies after a year when all our events have been canceled. And now, again, the biggest event of the year that a lot of people rely on for lead generation, networking, brand awareness, all that stuff, all the great things that happen at the trade show, now gone. That was the big piece of news that just came through.
Just sad, just another one on the list, cancellations. I cannot wait for life to resume as normal, but I also think in this new normal, people are going to find new opportunities to market. So it's a little bit of blessing inside it, but another sad, frustrating day of cancellations.
Yeah, and today, we wanted to talk about marketing and advertising during a recession and why you should do it. And we've got a very special guest on today, a really good friend, dear friend of ours, Mr. Matt Gordon, is going to drop some nuggets, some golden nuggets and knowledge bombs on us, backing up this claim, basically, because if anything history has taught us is that we can certainly learn from it and take that information and do better going into the future. And in another news nugget in current events type thing, Doug, you just mentioned offline, and we were talking about how TikTok, crazy channel, everybody's been blowing it up. I don't know really the practical business applications yet for our industry, but as far as a whole, I mean, it's hard to ignore what TikTok has done in the last year, 2 years. But they had some big news and big announcements that came up, right?
Yeah, they got 2 billion users worldwide, and they announced that they're pulling out in Asia, and they just announced that they may have a ban in the United States with relation to how privacy and censorship's being dealt with. But it wasn't so much that it's TikTok that caught my eye as much as it was the importance of how people become reliant on one simple thing. And I know Matt's got a wicked quote for us when he joins us, but that whole simple thing of just like being reliant on one platform or being reliant on one trade show, like you mentioned, if you compare those two things, for most people, that's their year. And we need to get away from that single point of failure.
Absolutely. So with that being said, I've got a very special guest, Mr. Matt Gordon. We're going to bring him on to talk, kind of give us some history about and tell us how and why, again, we should be marketing during recession. Matt, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Well, thanks for being here. We're trying. There's still a learning curve. I was telling you, it's still newish for us. We're getting all the logistics and technical pieces worked out. So hopefully this has been a good experience for you thus far. And for a guest, again, I think they're going to learn a lot today by just some of the stuff you've seen. Again, you're a great historian. And I wanted you to share some stories, again, why we're backing up our claims, that why and how people should advertise and market in a recession. And the reason I wanted to really talk about this today was because BCG just released a report. We'll pull it up, that the S&P 500 companies, the last time there was a global financial crisis, that the companies that increased or maintained their marketing spend, this was back in 2008, significantly outperformed the industry peers, growing sales by about 6.5 percentage points more than those that reduced their marketing spend. And I know you've got a couple other cases, so please fire away with what you've seen historically, even before 2008 and all that.
Sure. So looking back in history, what we find is that every economic downturn is a little bit different. And so it often feels like we're sailing in uncharted waters, or I guess flying in unmapped skies. I'm not sure how I would explain that to your crew, but we do know what happened in 2008, the 1980s, even the Great Depression. And some interesting stats here. Number one is 74% of ad buyers say that whatever economic impact that coronavirus is going to cause, it's going to be worse than the 2008 financial crisis, which was a pretty scary time for a lot of people. And I'm going to skip over that one and go back to the recession of kind of the late 70s, early 80s. McGraw-Hill Research looked at 600 companies from 1980 to 1985, and they found something really interesting. You'd mentioned that 6% stat. They found that companies that maintained or even increased their ad spend during the 1981 recession had sales that were 256% higher than those that didn't by 1985. So the effect is huge, and the effect is a really nice long-term bump. And sometimes you can really shake up a market uh, and create new leaders, new winners and new losers coming out of this by how they handled the economic circumstances and how they advertised.
Yeah. Now, that was a staggering number, so I want to make sure you can repeat it. It's 256%. They increased those that did it. And what was that time frame that they were able to recover? What was that in again?
From 1980 to 1985. So it's a 5-year span. So not exactly short-term quarterly profits kind of stuff, but certainly, in a window of reality here, right?
Yeah. Well, and Doug, I think we've talked about this and hit on this several times, is that, again, we're looking for long-term sustainable success. Obviously, we have to hit short-term quarterly goals and whatnot. But when you look at the overall health and projection of a company, I mean, these long-term projections, this gives a viable opportunity. Matt, you kind of mentioned it to shake up the playing field. Out of crisis becomes opportunity, and I think there's a prime time right now as, again, people are trying to reevaluate their business model, their vendors, that this is a great time to kind of position yourself and be top of mind.
Well, especially like with politics aside, you see that the boycott on Facebook right now, there's a lot of ad inventory available for people. And you're going to see less and less people. And if you go back to some of the fundamentals, you're basically literally bidding in an auction for attention. Mm-hmm. And if there's less people spending money, you can pay less for the attention than you can on other platforms. So being a marketer, I'm always going to be biased, but I would say during a recession is the best time for you to be marketing. It's the best time for you to go after and acquire customers. Because if you're not marketing, someone else is, and they will steal your customers, or at least give an attempt to steal your customers.
Matt, have you noticed anything historically that can point to that case specifically that might come to mind?
Oh, absolutely. We see precedents in the CPG space, consumer packaged goods, authority, restaurants, even technology as well. One of my favorite stories has to do with cereal, actually. Post was the category leader even in the 1920s. And when the Great Depression hit, like a lot of companies, they significantly decreased their ad spend. Kellogg's, they decided to take kind of the contrarian approach and doubled their ad spend. They introduced Rice Krispies, and profits grew by 30%. Kellogg's came to own the category, and they did for decades afterwards. So that's just one example of several of doubling down literally in Kellogg's case on ad spend during a really rough time. The other thing that you want to notice is that as Doug said, ad inventory is way up, so prices are way down, and it's going to be like that for some time. When we look at 2008, well, really it was a 2007 like downturn, right? But prices were still down. Ad buying was still down in 2008, 2009, 2010, all down years compared to 2007. Mm-hmm. So it took 4 years to get back to those pre-recession levels. And I think we're going to see something like that this time around as well. I think maybe a little bit faster, but I think that the window is open, and it's going to be open. And that's good news for people that want to get in the game and really be competitive.
Yeah.
Now, this is strictly an opinion, and I want to get your feedback on this, Matt. But one of the things I see is more established brand, I'll call them older companies who haven't fully embraced digital, they tend to retreat into the things they're comfortable with. They go back to traditional broadcast, their mass media buys, and they're opening up opportunities, especially in one, local markets. So regional, local players have more access to inventory. But number two, they tend to retreat from new things and they tend to retreat from digital because it's that unknown and they don't have the data. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And even in the St. Louis TV market, which we used to be a top 20 market, I don't think we are anymore. I think we've dropped to like 22, 23 now. I'm seeing advertising on TV for companies that I haven't seen ever. You know, these little smaller entities out there and kind of small business world. So that's really great to get more players in the game. As far as uh, the move away from digital, I haven't noticed that myself yet, but it kind of makes sense, and I think that we're going to see again. You know, you can look at the top of the market, the mid, or the bottom, and I think in those you're going to have strata in each group. So I think even in the bottom of the market, in terms of the size of the company, in terms of the overall ad budget, you're going to see winners and losers coming out, right? And it's going to be predicated on who's showing up where people are. And so I think that this time around, the smart people are going to be in digital, and they're going to lay into that hard. So ironically, we don't have a lot of data on that. I don't think coming from a historical perspective right now, simply because we're in the midst of a big media change. You could argue that we were there in 2007, 2008 as well, and certainly we saw the media mix being, you know, heavily affected in those times with where the money's going. So I think definitely we're gonna see something like that again. Uh, you know, we know that Facebook is really taking a hit right now for a lot of reasons, and that's interesting because they're one of the biggest digital players out there in terms of you know where you want to go to get traffic.
Yep. Are there any historical references on, like, you've seen in advertising when we've had any evolutions, like radio to TV when they went into like mass broadcast and multiple channels and then into the internet? Have you seen any results of these booms or anything that'd be relative to where we sit now?
You know, I think it's such an odd time that nothing really, unfortunately, nothing really comes to mind just at this moment. One interesting thing, when we look at the technology sector, if you look at Apple, it was something that was started in kind of a downtime, and all of their big leaps and all of their big, you know, innovations have come during economic downturns. 2007 when the iPhone was introduced, you know, 2001 when the iMac came out, and that was shortly after Steve Jobs came back to the company. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of innovation right now because companies kind of have to be a little scrappier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the whole scrappier thing that you mentioned, Matt, I mean, again, with the majority of people looking forward and leaning on an event like our annual convention base, again, those advertising opportunities that they capitalized on, again, are gone. And the way that they need to innovate and be scrappy, again, is capitalizing on the digital options that are out there. And we said at the beginning of the show, at the top of the hour, you know, not putting all your eggs in one basket. So, you know, you need to be omni-channel between Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, programmatic advertising, all this stuff, which all gets into, again, can you be smarter about your data? Because again, when you want to increase ad spend or talk about maintaining an ad spend pre-recession levels, you have to now be smarter and more deliberate with where you're placing those ads. And fortunately, in the time that we live in, the technology and the tools are there that you can absolutely make the best choices and be the most efficient and optimized for whatever ad set or campaign you're trying to run.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, we've discussed it today, and people have been discussing it now for I don't know 4 months or so. You know, in-person events not so hot anymore, and that being the case, a lot of companies are going to say, well, be that as it may, I've got a certain marketing budget I've got to do something with because I need a certain amount of growth out of those dollars. So where am I going to go with that? And I think instead, they don't have the option apparently of the live events and the conventions and some of the more, person to person things. And I think you're going to see a lot of data intensive, kind of personalized, really hyper targeted marketing as a result of that, where they can make those, if you think about it, kind of a one to many connection sort of thing, much like you would do, shaking 300 hands, in a live event and getting 300 business cards, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the way that they're going to go with it, which I think is going to be very efficient. And if they use their creative right, I think it's going to be really helpful. It's not going to work to say, "Hey, here I am. I'd sure like some of your money." They're going to have to be relevant in ways that a lot of the image-based advertising isn't right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're bringing this topic up because hi Ashley, thanks for watching. She said thanks for covering this topic because traditionally, again, a lot of the advertising that you see in my industry again is that image based. You see this sexy picture of the jets and the executive vehicles and executive type lifestyle, even though we know it's much more than that. But again, it's a very image based advertising. And now again, you're needing to change kind of that message, right? You need to be a little more empathetic and a little more relatable. So the big premise of our show is that we want to explain to people, again, from a high level view, like why they should be doing something. But now let's kind of shift gears and bring it down to a ground level for people that they can start taking away today. Like, how should people start doing this? And you started to touch on it, and again, transitioning away from more image-based type messaging or campaigns. What's one thing, or what's your best piece of advice for people now that are looking to allocate or make the most out of their 2020 budget to try and make sure that they're positioning themselves in a way that they could come out as a winner as opposed to a loser, as you had mentioned earlier?
I think, and I'm going to defer to Doug for this quite a bit. So, Doug, be ready. I'm gonna throw it to you next. But I have to say this. I'm kind of this predictive historian, right? And so when I look back at how wealth and power are generated in America, we're kind of on the fifth wave. Okay, so first of all, it was what? Real estate, because that got you water rights, it got you mineral rights, it allowed you to control agricultural production, that kind of thing. And then we moved into sort of an industrial phase, right? So Andrew Carnegie shows up, Rockefeller shows up, the titans of industry because they're manufacturing. And then the third wave was transportation. Okay, we're creating all the stuff. How do we zip it around the country? That's when railroads really started becoming a more dominant way of moving goods, from one end of the country to the other. And really, I mean, railroads are still a pretty cool thing. That's why Warren Buffett, invests in them, because federal law says you can't build a railroad next to an existing railroad. So they kind of have this, government enforced monopoly. Moving on, the fourth wave was technology, and we've seen all of the cool stuff there. But we're on the fifth wave right now, and that's clearly data. And so if you're not doing everything you can to collect that data and make use of that data in ways that are benefiting you and your customer, you're kind of asleep at the wheel and you're missing out on the contemporary way that wealth and power are generated in America. When you see Amazon beat a little guy, it's not because they have lower pricing or wider selection or faster delivery. Those are all competitively conquerable advantages, right? Mm-hmm. The reason that Amazon beats the little guy, and that's a pattern we've seen, Sears and Roebuck, Walmart, and so on. The reason that the big guy beats the little guy is because Amazon has incredible data about their customer and they use it. Meanwhile, a lot of people that have not entered that fifth wave, they don't really have respect for data. They're not making an attempt to collect data. They're not making an attempt to use data. And so I would say for any company right now, really trying to get a handle on efficient and accountable marketing, that's where you need to be. Doug, over to you.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like having data and building your own first party data is becoming one of the single most important things you can do as a business. And if you're solely reliant on the data that sits inside of Amazon, inside of Facebook, inside Google, the reason that they're billion and soon to be $1 trillion companies isn't because of the products they have. It's because the data those products produce and they store and then rent back to people in the form of advertising or some form of reporting. I mean, Facebook's only valuable because of the information it has on its users. Same with Google. Argumentatively, they have some other tech and IP and they've bought other companies, but the core of all of those companies is the data. And as a business, if you're not figuring out how to create and collect your own data, which they call first party, the cost of rent is just going to continue to go up and up. The second most important thing, which you said, Matt, was actioning that data. Do you have ways to look at it and figure out what do I need to do? And you and I had talked to this before, I think, with couponing. Supermarkets used to send out flyers and they'd use coupons to figure out, okay, did this marketing work? Did the customer come in? And they would start to collect that. That was the first kind of way retailers would say, did my marketing work? But then you had people like the Yellow Pages come in, and you had smarter shopping systems come in that predated Facebook and Amazon. But now just the way they process data and move it around is so far advanced that it's really important. If you're not on that wave, you need to hurry up and get on that wave. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind, and it's going to just be too expensive for you to rent the data anymore, and you're just going to be behind the curve and not able to catch up.
So, kind of the flesh and blood analog of that, and getting back to talking about trade shows and conventions and things like that, when you pay to exhibit at a convention or a trade show, right? And you talk to that has a certain level of attendance, and then you talk to another number, and then actually the smallest number of the three buy, right? Okay, when you paid to be there, you didn't pay just for the people that bought. You paid for everyone at that convention. And so what are you doing to collect that data and use that data so that you can leverage that, because that becomes a true asset of your business?
Yeah. Now, you guys both brought up like incredibly awesome points, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want to get your like holistic view of, again, why people pull back their marketing spend during a recession, right? And it's most of those times, most of the answers is because they haven't realized or actualized an ROI. Is that because they haven't been utilizing and tracking the right data? As you mentioned, Matt, and Doug, you'd hit on it too, about taking that data, the right data, and executing on that data.
I can tell you right now, we're running a campaign for a client, and we have some pretty advanced analytics. We actually have some identity resolution tools. We have a unique tracking tool that actually attributes engagement. But here's the interesting thing, and why they need to be more open-minded and understand how to look at the numbers. This is what I meant by actioning it. A lot of times, and you can both tell me this, if you see an ad or something, chances are you're then going to Google that company. You may even actually switch devices and go Google the company or go directly to the domain. And one of the interesting things we kept seeing is people would engage with ads or engage with content, but then the direct traffic would spike. So anytime we're running ads, our direct visits, meaning they typed in the domain, came directly to the site. And I've seen this across multiple campaigns I've run for other clients. Anytime we're in market with campaigns, usually Google or Facebook, the direct traffic to the site usually goes with it almost one for one. And ironically, the conversions were up significantly higher. So we can't directly attribute it 100%, but we can tell based on, we can infer the data that says, hey, when we're doing X, Y happens. So having that lens of understanding makes a big difference. But had they not been in market during this, they would not have seen that spike.
I can remember going through that exact same discovery process, Doug, in like 2007, 2008 with banner ads.
Yeah.
When everybody wanted to sell on the basis of click-through. How many people clicked on my banner ad, right?
Yeah.
And the problem that on the vendor side they were running into was the fact that, well, some people just won't, but they're going to see the creative in that ad and they're going to Google that name, or they're going to go right back there. Or in a retargeting case, and I deal with this all the time with a client of mine, they may not click on the ad, but they remember who the ad's for, and they remember they are on the site, and so they're just going to go back in their browser history, like direct traffic. That's all that is, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just one of those. It's kind of like the rising tide floats all boats, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just.
Yes.
It's not a one-to-one thing. That's just not how it works. When you start, seeding that world out there, you're gonna get far more than you put in. So yeah, absolutely.
Was it Ogilvy that said the problem with advertising is 50% of it works, we just don't know which 50%?
Well, that's an interesting quote, Doug. Actually, from the best I can tell, it was John Wanamaker who owned a series of department stores, I think based out of New York. And the interesting thing about him is he would run these kind of clever little ads back in like the 1920s and 30s. So, a good quote to keep in mind right now is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The guy that gave FDR that quote and wrote it into the speech, we think probably saw that in an ad for Wanamaker's department stores. They would have like in the corner of the ad, they would have like quotes from our founder, and it was like patriotic and kind of, inspirational quotes and things like that. And they think that's there, but it was even attributed to P.T. Barnum at one point. But it was, half of the advertising that I spend for my business is wasted, and gee, if I only knew what half, right? And we can come a lot closer now, which is a dream come true for the direct marketers of old, but we still can't get it necessarily down to the right person. But we can measure the lift, and we can measure ROI really reliably, and that's what you've got to do. So, performance marketing can sometimes take a hit in economic downturns because they're trying to do stuff on values and mission and stuff like that. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that move, but that's what we see.
I agree. I wish people, and first of all, this is why we love Matt so much, is just those absolute story bombs of like real history. So thank you. But I can't agree more. I understand, and Chris and I have had this chat multiple times about brand. I understand the importance of brand and messaging, but I've always believed, like, when it comes down to marketing, is just help them solve the problem. Whether that's through content, whether that's through your service or product, if you can do that and demonstrate that successfully, you'll pull through the tough times and market that. Market the problem you're solving or educate them on a problem that exists. Like, this is the perfect time for someone to create a content brand. It is a perfect time.
I agree with you, but I think that the case to be made for a lot of the image stuff is just to maintain top of mind, okay? If I'm a plumber, I'm not going to run ads constantly so that when your toilet is, sending water the wrong way, like you're going to wait until you see an ad on TV for the next plumber. No, what are you going to do? You're going to grab your phone and say, plumber, get here now. And, whoever can get here the fastest gets the business, right? So if there is some brand recognition, that's where it's, I think, going to come from. I was just thinking when you were talking about content and especially data, is one, I think Warren Buffett had the quote about, when the tide rolls out, you can see the people that were swimming naked. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of right now.
A lot of people are getting exposed. Yeah.
A lot of people are getting exposed. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. And I think it's because there's really two different kinds of marketing. And nobody ever talks about this. There's the productive marketing, which is I'm going to put $1 in get a buck and a quarter, $2, $5 out, whatever your ROI is going to be. But there's also the kind of survival marketing, and that's rarely focused on right now because it's not today's money. A lot of business owners, especially in SMB land, they want to write a check for advertising today, get the money in the bank from that advertising tomorrow so it can pay for the check they wrote to pay for the advertising today, right?
Yeah.
And that's just, so there's the ROI stuff, but I think that a lot of businesses that are really hurting right now, and I want to be sympathetic here because, when the government comes in and says, hey, you've got to close, like that's not because you did something wrong, right? Like that's just the reality of the environment. But I see a lot of businesses which could be doing a lot better than they are if only they had bothered to develop some assets. So that first party data, that's a huge one. Any sort of way to like talk to your customers and have that, keep that communication going, that's another. And any sort of, stuff like that you can develop that's going to be tomorrow money, right? You can continue to get, it's an asset that generates money over and over and over again. So that I think is something that a lot of businesses are just going to have to take their lumps right now, and hopefully the next time the rains come, and for sure they will, that they've got something in place to keep them afloat. Because when you're dependent only on the income of yesterday's work, when that dries up, you're in big trouble.
I think Kevin Kelly wrote a really good essay called 1,000 True Fans. And I think that's probably the greatest foundation of first party data. And basically the synopsis of it, we'll put it in the notes below, but the basic synopsis was if you have 1,000 true followers, they'll be willing to buy whatever product it is. But if you haven't built mechanisms in your business, like even if it's as simple as just figuring out how to tag audiences on the different platforms, but ideally building an email list and, a phone list. I mean, if you were to look at a really successful salesperson, it's because of their Rolodex.
Yep.
And I mean, now all the contacts are on their phone, but when that guy showed up in the office his first day and he's got like this big block of business cards that he can pick up and call like that and generate revenue, I think some of those fundamentals are what's missing in the core of business today. They've gotten so easy, like it's been fairly easy to open a business, run some ads, get some business, but now that it's tougher, they have to go back to some of the fundamentals of building an audience, building a list, and then figuring out how do I have conversations to monetize that list.
Yeah. So many great things we topped on, and this just gets the wheels spinning for what we want to carry on with the conversation next week. But I think the big takeaway, if I heard you guys all correctly and kind of want to summarize this, is obviously, again, statistically we see that by investing in that long-term brand values, brand awareness, that you can recover and come out of a recession much quicker than your competitors. And the opportunity to do so when everybody's recanting, you can start to gain market share and compete with people that you probably didn't historically think you could. In addition to that, what you can start doing today is obviously gathering the right data and how important it is to make the right steps, not missteps, and to use that data to your advantage and to leverage that. Again, because it's not like you have to be the best at it. You just have to be better than your competition. And right now, we know that opportunity is incredible for the business aviation space, especially, again, now that events are canceled. Everybody is scrambling, figuring out what the heck to do the last bit of 2020, so that way 2021 comes in and you can be out the gates running when everybody's stumbling at the starting blocks. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully this was fun for you. You just dropped incredible storage and alley bombs. Hope to have you back again in the future to talk about other stuff, but really appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. We'll talk anytime, you guys.
Perfect. All right, guys. Website will be coming live this week. I swear it will be doing it. Doug and I are going to be on that. Thank you. If you thought this was helpful, drop us some comments below. Be sure to follow us on all our social handles at marketingfl3000 or 300. I'm sorry. So that's marketing at 30,000 feet. And look forward to seeing you guys again live next week. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.